Yeah. And what you said before about not taking a forceful position on things, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with having convictions, right?
Sure.
And being willing to defend them forcefully. But you should still retain an open mind and a willingness to hear the other guy's side and argue for it.
Well, like you said earlier, respect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. I really do think it's about mutual respect. I mean, let's face it. Nobody is ever going to listen to your argument if the best you can do is just argue with them. You know?
Or just when you're resorting to fallacies and getting angry and just
sure, yeah. And I think this is my last question. I'll leave you guys with this.
Okay.
It sounds like you were saying some of the atheists get angry because you don't support their beliefs. Also, do you guys ever deal with a lot of cognitive dissonance in your movement, or it sounds like you yourselves live with open minds? I'm curious if, and I'm just saying if science were to, through this black hole creator, this atom smasher that they were building, everybody was afraid they were going to build a black hole that was going to suck up the Earth, and if at some point scientists were able to dig deep enough or go far enough to actually prove or disprove God, and I would go with the latter. If they were actually able to prove God, you guys would take that into consideration and wouldn't suffer from the same cognitive dissonance that you expressed other people suffering from earlier, right?
Yeah, just because we're atheists doesn't mean that we're permanent atheists. I think we always say we're open to evidence. We don't expect any. I mean, we've been looking for it for a while and haven't seen it come in, but if some really good knockdown argument was made for the existence of God, I think it would be possible that some people would change their minds.
Right, well, for example, one thing I usually say to people who ask me about ideas like the afterlife, right? Life after death. I tell them I'm all for it, right? Great idea. But again, I would rather, if there is none or if there is no good evidence for one, I think that it is perhaps both emotionally and intellectually healthy to just accept the reality in which we live, accept that we are here but for a very short time, and so we have to make all of it count, and this is all we get, rather than just adopting a belief system that is really nothing more than sort of a shield over my fear of my mortality. And so that's, we're just not big on putting our ignorance on an altar and calling it faith, which a lot of religious people seem to do.
Very cool. I think I'd like to say I probably, as an Orthodox Christian, have a little bit more in common with you folks than I do with a lot of Protestants and Roman Catholics.
Right. Except for the God thing, but
we're glad of that, because I always say that as atheists, we're not here to make enemies of people. We would like to have as many people close to our sides, even if they disagree about the philosophical background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what's cool, and I think the other people listening can take heart from, is that you keep open minds. And I think that's the best for everybody.
Back at you.
All right? You guys have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your call, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
I would like to take James in Canton, Ohio.
Yes, I think they have him on the list.
James.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Fine.
We're great.
Hi. I just want to talk about something since Christmas is coming up. My question goes to both you guys, the hosts, and to the literal Bible believers that are listening. Let's see, where do I start? Basically, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 10, there's a passage that talks about how you're not supposed to do the customs of the worthless people in other nations. And one of those customs it lists is cutting down a tree and putting it up in your home and decorating it. And when I was discussing this with my family, it was hard enough to convince them that there were 600 commandments instead of 10. I tried to point this part out to them. And the reasoning that I got from them was from outside the Bible. And they started to feel threatened about their, I guess, American identity. And they said, well, it's an attack on Christmas. It's an attack on everything American. And I was pointing this right out to them from the Bible, and I wasn't really getting a straight answer. And I guess my question is why do you think people who claim the Bible is literal line by line, why do they reason from outside of the Bible when it's presented to them right there in front of them? It just seems like you never get a straight, concrete answer.
Well,
and
I mean,
if you're against gay, say if you're against gay marriage because the Bible says so, and because the Bible says it's true, then why do you put a Christmas tree up in your home?
I think
I would suggest that, not to burst in, but I would suggest that a lot of the people who call themselves biblical literalists are the ones less likely to have actually read the Bible through word for word, and because you can always point to some little discrepancy like that, right? And when you immediately ask them about such issues as, okay, well, if you're against abortion, for example, for biblical reasons, show me where it's mentioned in there, because it isn't. It's always funny how the Bible is literally true except when it's not. You know, like how God is all powerful except when He's not, right? And point out a little area where their beliefs are not entirely consistent, and then they scramble to place some CYA, and you know, it just sort of reveals that they're just kind of going on gut instinct here, and not a literal interpretation. Because of course, if they say that you know, the Bible is literally true, then you would have to point out to them that the very first time as a child you ever disobeyed them, they were under orders to kill you, right? I mean, you know, just drag you out in the street and pelt you to death with stones.
I've got a handy message from the control room who quoted the particular verse you mentioned of Jeremiah 10:3. For the customs of the people are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest, and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel.
Oh, well, there you go. See, because if I were a Christian, I would say, but my Christmas tree's plastic, so it doesn't count, right?
Yeah.
See, and I'd get around it that way.
Or I mean, I don't know. In talking to Christians, there are all kinds of ways you can weasel out of the Bible. I mean, you can say, I mean, you know, even if you say that the Bible has to be literal word for word, they're also saying, like, oh yeah, but that part of the Bible is Jesus using some symbolism, and so he literally said that.
Yeah. It's literal except then where it's symbolic.
Yeah.
Or metaphorical.
So I mean, or you can have situations where there's an obvious apparent contradiction in the Bible, and you know there's no end of ways to get out of that. I mean, you know, it could one verse could say Jesus had a dog and no cat, and another verse could say Jesus had a cat and no dog, and they would say like, oh well, these came after each other, or or you know, the Greek word is actually translated so that it's another meaning of dog or something like that. I mean. There are so many different oddities of the Bible and the way people interpret it that I usually just don't bother, because in the end I don't care what the Bible says. And I think that getting sidetracked into issues like, oh, you want to follow the Bible but the Bible says this and you don't follow it, is really kind of going off on a tangent from the more important fact, who cares what the Bible says?
Yeah, well, Christians have a $20 word for the whole biblical interpretation thing, which is hermeneutics, which is Christianese for insist that the Bible is literally true until somebody points out something in it that is inconsistent or reprehensible morally or what have you, at which point you say something like, well, you're not interpreting the Bible properly. And that's kind of how it works.
I see.
So you sound like a guy who might be interested in checking out the Iron Chariots wiki if you haven't looked at it yet. That's the counter-apologetics.
Facebook, but I've never checked it out. But
yeah, because we just noticed that your original question, at least as it's listed here, is what advice do you have for debating fundamentalist Christians? And that's sort of a good shop for some basic counter-apologetics arguments.